inspired by Pradeep, I thought I'd start with a couple of quick stories for context and see if that draws us in a little bit more. I once attended a venture capital pitch session where each of the four startups got 2 minutes each. So pretty brutal. You had to go really, really fast. And this one guy spent one of his 2 minutes talking about skydiving. And his pitch had nothing to do with skydiving. It was some kind of like, app, had to do with cryptocurrency in the early days of when cryptocurrency was taking off. And I thought, like, this guy is wasting his time. He spent a minute talking about skydiving, and that's irrelevant. And then it turned out that he knew that the main person vetting these startups was pretty like into himself and also loved skydiving. And so this was like a great way to pander to the VC guy. And I don't know that I recommend doing that generally, in every case, but in this case, it worked really well. And I asked him afterward, like, how did you know to do that? Because, he was able to move on to the next step. And the guy came up to him afterward to talk about skydiving and where do you go and what plane. And, so they kind of had this personal connection afterward. He's like, oh, I just researched the guy, and I researched him in a few different ways. And I thought, man, I need to get more into how I research who I'm pitching to before I pitch. And maybe there's a way to get kind of methodical about that so that it's not a super, time intensive process. So another quick story kind of about that same concept. I was in business school at Stanford, and one of my classmates, absolute brilliant guy, was pretty nervous before a class. And I asked him why. And he said, well, today we have the CEO of HBO speaking in the class. There's 30 people in the class. I'm going to get some airtime with this guy, and I want to work for him. I don't just want to work for HBO. I want to work under the CEO directly. It's like, wow, that's a big, goal. Like, how are you going to impress him in the class? It's like, well, I used to work for Netflix, and Netflix is a competitor. So HBO might recognize that I have some value to add if I can contribute from, a competitor's perspective. And then as soon as the class starts, the HBO guy says, Netflix is not a competitor, and here's why. And he goes off to list like 4 or 5 points, I don't really remember, about why Netflix is not a competitor. So my poor friend, who had founded his entire, thesis on why he should be, hired by this guy, was kind of sweating in his chair. And then as the HBO guy continues to talk, he mentions one of their brilliant directors who's created several good TV shows and that sort of thing. And my friend raises his hand and says, conspicuously missing from your list of excellent, movies created by this guy is this one movie or this one TV show that kind of flopped. It didn't do so well. And when I was working at Netflix, we had this show that was very successful that's actually pretty similar. And here's how and he went on to quickly describe how the Netflix show, even though it was very similar to this HBO show, really did much better. And, how perhaps Netflix is and should be considered, a competitor to HBO. I'm not sure if he wound up getting hired, but he definitely put himself back in the runnings with that comment. And I asked him afterward, like, hey, how did you know to say that? Like, how did you do that research? And he's like, oh, I just took this one credit class taught by this really smart guy, Raymond Nasser. You should check it out. He's really good. So he used to be, what does it say here? Director of Executive Communications at Google. So how did Google executives communicate internally and externally? And Google was started and run by engineers who, and the way that they describe it, weren't necessarily the best at communication. So they got this guy in, and he's fantastic. So I took his class, and it's a pretty simple class. So he breaks it down into these 3 sections, and it's a nice little acronym too. Like, so you think about your presentation. What is the aim of your presentation? And AIM stands for audience, intent, and message. So you want to go in that order. So you're first thinking about your audience. Who are you going to present to? And it's in the same way that, as Pradeep was talking about, how it's hard to think about what the world wants and what the customer wants. There's the example of those motorbikes, right? There's what you want and like what you're excited about and how you imagine yourself on stage or in front of the Zoom camera or whatever. And it's harder to take a step back and be humble and think about spending time on what the audience wants, but that's the right place to start. And then you can come up with what your intent is. Put this on hold, think about who these people are, and then you can think about how you can attach your intent to this audience. And then you can get into writing a message, crafting a message that helps to deliver the intent according to what the audience wants. So AIM is kind of a nice thing to think about, not just ahead of time before you give the presentation and as you're crafting your presentation, but also as you're delivering your presentation. So in that second story, in the case of my friend who wanted to work for the HBO CEO, how did he use AIM in the actual classroom? He thought of a way to, get under the guy's skin about a movie or a TV show that hadn't done very well at HBO. And in that way, draw a parallel to Netflix and to his own experience and present himself as sort of, potential savior or preventer for, of things like that happening in the future. So you want to go in order: audience, then intent, and then message. And just to focus in on audience, I want to give you guys some quick tips from this class. This is the way that Raymond breaks it down, and he was happy to have me share this with you. He wants this to be disseminated more widely. So you can think of your audience in three different categories here. There's the organization itself. So who is the audience, whether it's a VC firm or maybe it's a prospective client? What is this organization that you're pitching to? And then project. The project is like, what is the context for this pitch? Is this a corporate venture capital team that you're pitching to, and perhaps they once every quarter have startups come in, and what is the context for the actual project within the organization? And then finally, who are the people in the room who you're going to pitch to? So for the organization, I just have some bullet points here, and I'll talk through them, and then I'll pause at the end and see what you guys think, because I don't want to be lecturing too long in the overall time here, even though this is kind of a lecture-based delivery. So you can think about like the industry of participation. So this organization, say that you're a startup and you want to sell into Salesforce. So you have some widget that's going to make Salesforce awesome. And so you can think about how Salesforce is in an industry. They're in the CRM industry, so customer relationship management. And you can think about what's going on in that industry. Maybe there's been some kind of consolidation in the industry. Maybe there's been explosion of new competitors and small companies that are cropping up everywhere in the industry and starting to eat at the heels of the big, Salesforces or that sort of thing. And that kind of bleeds into the second point here. Is this a concentrated industry where there's only a few players, or is it highly competitive and we don't really know who's going to, surge ahead from the others? These are the kinds of things that might help you craft your pitch, because these are the kinds of things that people who run these sorts of organizations are going to be thinking about. And it's really easy to keep people's attention if you're talking about something that they're already thinking about. There's this concept of like intellectual momentum. So you go from one meeting where you're talking about something and you're thinking about something to the next meeting, you're talking and thinking about something. Maybe you've, dreamed about it or stayed up at night worrying about it. If there's something that already has some intellectual momentum and you can plug yourself into that, you're going to be a lot more memorable. You can think about the organization's control within the industry. So are they in a position of power, or are they kind of coveting a position of power that they don't have yet? Who are upstream from them? So upstream would mean, how do they supply whatever it is that they do best with services that come from others? So who are they reliant on that are upstream from them in order to deliver what they deliver? And then you can think about who's downstream from them. So say it's an oil and gas company, and they are a refining company. So they make useful products like gasoline and diesel, taking in crude oil. So the upstream firms from them would be companies that do exploration and production and create the crude oil that they then use. And downstream from them might be a plastics company that creates things from from some of the things that are refined. So you can think about like where they land, where they are in the supply chain, and who in particular they have relationships with, upstream or downstream. And this could craft your pitch entirely, or these could be examples that you give in your pitch. So if you want to explain your service, you might mention a company that they already know, and you might mention it in a familiar way, so that you're on pace with their intellectual momentum as they're thinking about those kinds of companies. Imagine how much time you have to eat up giving context, if you're explaining something from outside the industry that you're pitching into, versus if you can give them an example from right there inside of their own industry, referencing a client in a way that's familiar to them, and then make your point within that context. It's just so much more efficient and so much more memorable. You can think about their brand image. You know, if you're pitching to Apple, for example, what kind of things do you associate with Apple? You know, the blue jeans and Steve Jobs and the turtleneck or something. You know, what kinds of images and what kinds of brand awareness are out there for that organization? And then, of course, you can think about their biggest success stories. It's risky to think about big failures. You know, I gave the example of my friend speaking up in class about a failure, and he was trying to earn back lost ground. Sometimes it's more effective. I'd say more often than not, it's more effective instead to talk about success stories and to affiliate yourself with success stories. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second, and I'm curious to hear from people. Any examples when you thought about the organization that you were going to pitch to before you actually pitched to them? Any startups out there done some pitching, and did you research the organization ahead of time?
Yeah. I I had a, it wasn't exactly like a pitch, but it was like more of a conversational pitch, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
it was to like a one of global distributors who was interested in my product. And so like, yeah, I did some, basic research on them.
Got it. Yeah. And so when you did that research, how did you do it? What was the first thing you did? And then what did that lead to? And did you find it helpful?
I so I mean, it was like basic research, like who they are, who do they work with, like basic stuff like that. But I wasn't sure at the time when I was doing it. It was kind of helpful because it kind of eases your nerves. I think it's like more psychological
Hmm.
because like when you're having conversations with these people, especially as a student, most people don't tend to take you seriously. So I think like when you have more information, it puts more weight in the conversation itself, because then I have examples and references.
Hmm.
And I think more than you do research on them, I think you should have more knowledge about the industry they're in, so
Hmm.
you can,
Yeah. So sort of the context for the organization within the industry. And I love your point about how if you're a student, they might have some assumptions about you and what you don't know. And if you can contradict those assumptions, then you can gain credibility. So is if as soon as you sit down and start the conversation, you're already versed in their industry and you know what's going on, then they might take you a bit more seriously, even if your idea is not, particularly relevant to all the nuances of what's happening in their industry outside of that context. Yeah, nice.
Harry, you have your hands up.
Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
Whenever I'm in a pitch competition or just in a talk, if I know who I'm meeting before the meeting, because sometimes, like if you're in a pitch competition, especially, you'll have like a list of the judge. The preliminary research is mainly just like LinkedIn, anything you can find on the web, and I'm just trying to make connections that I have, whether that's a small one like gaming or computer science, or whether that's a larger one relating to my startup. If I as many connections as I can find, as many like little things that I can relate to as possible.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. And I like that idea of connections. If you find someone who you know who's connected to wherever you're going to pitch to, how can you leverage that relationship? Any ideas there?
Oh, is that a question?
Yeah. I can speak to it, but I'm curious to have you speak to it since it's your example. Yeah.
Yeah, you like honestly, you can ask them, especially if you're strong connections with people. You can just be like, hey, like, what should I emphasize? Like, from this person, what do they care about? Because like, especially if you have like a friend who knows this person, you can totally just like ask them, hey, I'm talking to this person, what should I talk about?
Yeah. And something you might consider is to actually go through these various bullet points with them, if they're willing. So something that happens, I think, pretty often when a friend wants to help, especially if it's not a stranger, if it's a friend, is they kind of know who you are and they want to tell you what you want to hear. So it's kind of like, imagine you're going to go on stage and sing a song. Your friends are going to be like, you got this, pat on the back, like, don't worry, just do your best. And there's a lot of like enthusiastic support as opposed to, sometimes more critical thinking that goes into it. And so like, don't worry, he's a great guy. I know him, that sort of thing. And you can mention that you have the mutual connection and that can help. But sometimes it's harder to get a friend to think, critically about what are the actual facts. And so it can be helpful to go through these kinds of bullet points with somebody who has insider information, and that can go way faster than if you're trying to research it just on Google or whatever on your own ahead of time. Yeah, I think that's really smart. Yeah, finding somebody who already knows can be like a great shortcut in this process. So we've talked about organization. Then there's also like the project level here. So in the project level, you can think about like, why did this project get started? What happened that is allowing you to pitch to this organization? I'm kind of assuming the context that we're all startups trying to pitch to get, support, whether that's money or advice or that sort of thing. But this is, this concept that audience intent message applies beyond just startups trying to pitch. But I'll keep the examples from that context. So maybe you're pitching to a company that's decided to start its own corporate venture capital group. What were the goals when it got started? Does that corporate venture capital group have its own, web page or have its own part of the main website from the company? And what do they say about how it started? Are there any clips from, like a newsreel or something with the person who got it started talking about why they started it? Or is that something you can research somehow? And then the timeliness of it, like what's going on now? Is there something in particular that's happening like at the moment that makes this project especially relevant? You can also think about typically when you do a sort of pitch, there's a next step that's already in mind for the organization. And something that I see a lot from startups is they pitch and they don't have a clear ask, or their ask doesn't fit the context of the pitch. So they're pitching to a bunch of angels and they're like, and that's why we're looking for the right lawyer. And the angels are a little confused because they were preparing to think about how to invest and what's the company worth or something. And instead, now they're trying to think, well, do I know a good lawyer for this? And they're trying to remember the thing that they heard before. So you want to kind of like think about who you're pitching to based on where that pitch is going to go. Like, what is the next step? And if you have a clear understanding of what the next step that's expected is from the people you're pitching to, it's way easier to develop a pitch that, points directly at that. And it sounds kind of obvious, but it's one of those things that like people mess up on pretty frequently. So keep that in mind. Then, of course, similar with the organizational level, at the project level, you want to think about big success stories. Who are some of the startups that the corporate venture capital group invested in that really like gave them humongous returns on their investment? If it's an angel group, who are some of the people who came through that group who did very well? The poster children, the ones that you see advertised on the website of the organization. And how can you affiliate yourselves with them or align your pitch to sort of match how they did their pitch or that sort of thing? And then you can think about like, who's watching this? So optics is an important thing, as we've talked about, presentation matters. Imagine, that think back to that Taj Mahal image there. So you've got people inside who are affiliated with this project, who are inside the room or inside the Zoom call, and they're kind of watching this and they want to see how it goes. And there's people inside of the organization, and how are they perceiving this and how do they want it to go? And then there's like externally, outside of this project, like how are things being viewed and who's watching them? And these are all things that you can research, and depending on who you're pitching to, this might be more or less important. I'll tell you that in the world of like corporate venture capital, if you're pitching to an organization that has a venture capital team, but is itself like a large organization, like a big company, then the external eyes matter a ton. So the people who are outside of the corporate venture capital team, outside of the actual pitch session, who are watching to make sure that the corporate venture capital team deserves to exist and is doing a good job vetting startups and, finding the right ones to actually work with. Those kinds of people have a lot of influence. And so you want to think about like, what kinds of things do they care about? And how can you like focus in on that to make sure that your pitch addresses that and helps them look good in these external eyes. And then you can also think about the biggest risk to the firm. So, I've seen successful pitches before to angel syndicates and to venture capital groups that own the fact that they're not going to be a huge success. And that might sound counterintuitive. Typically as a startup, you're trying to like wow the audience and like we're changing the world. But every so often you see a startup that's like, look, we're like a really safe bet here and we're going to grow like a nice steady way for the next 6 years or so. Because they know that a big risk to a VC firm, even a big risk to an angel syndicate, is to have too many failures and to hurt their image in the eyes of their limited partners. So often you have people who are general partners who get to decide on where the money goes and who gets invested in. But you also have these limited partners who are people behind the scenes who are giving money to the general partners. And they want to see good returns, but a huge risk is they don't want to see huge losses. So every so often it's good for the average venture capital group to invest in something that's a lot more safe, even though it's a lot less potentially, humongous. And so some startups pitch to that opportunity and try to present themselves as a nice, safe bet. And that can work really well. So we've talked about the organization and the project level. Then there's the people level. And I've broken this out into like a different structure here. It's still Raymond Nasser's information. But if we just look through it, so there's authority. So you can think about like who has what authority in the organizational chart. So who's really the boss? And the word that Raymond uses is buck stops. So when there's something that is confusing or something that people are not sure about, where is the decision ultimately made? And sometimes what you see is that there's like a lot of uncertainty in like how you evaluate a startup because it doesn't fit traditional checkboxes. And then you can figure out like, all right, well, who ultimately makes that decision? That might be someone that you particularly like cater your speech to. Then there's knowledge. That's like the areas of depth that people have in the room. So if you say, well, I know this person's an expert at that, so can you give me an example of this or whatever, you lend credence to their knowledge. And you can also think about where they're getting their information. So where are their sources of information? You probably don't want to conflict the sources of information that they have. There's their habitat. So their peer influencers and their performance indicators. So that's more about how you make them look good and how you demonstrate that they're already good at what they're doing within their habitat. Then there's the psychography. So psychography has to do with their beliefs and opinions. And so if you challenge somebody's psychography, you're challenging a core belief that they have. And then that tends to be like really hard to do. It's one thing to like turn, give them a twist in your pitch, which is interesting and memorable and surprise them. It's another thing to say, hey, something that you stand for is wrong and you should change, you know, your belief. It's much easier to change somebody's strategy than to change like the beliefs that it's based on. So you probably want to align with their beliefs, and you'll notice a good way to determine people's beliefs are their behaviors and proclivities. So if you research them that way, then that tends to go pretty well. And this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. A lot of folks think of organization, project, and people as this sort of Venn diagram, and you want to like target the middle. I think of it this way instead, and I'd encourage you to think of it this way. So you've got the organization context on the outside. That's helpful to know. You want to focus even more on the project that like, you know, you're pitching to, and then you want to focus even more in on the people that you're pitching to. So that's the audience. And then for intent, this goes much faster now. This is about what you want. So typically you want to just have one goal, one call to action in your pitch. We're looking for lawyers. We're looking to hire better people. We're looking for a partnership here. We want to raise capital. What is it, right? And then you want to see how, based on your research, you can align the various goal options that you have with what you've discovered here. And if you've aligned a goal way better than another goal, it could be that that's the right pitch to make, even though the other goal would have been better for you to accomplish. So think about that when you're giving these presentations and when you're designing your pitch decks. And the ones that you can't really match, you need to save for a different audience. You've probably heard this analogy to your own resume. If you're trying to get a job, you know, it's one thing to just have your general resume that you float around to everybody, but if you really want to take it seriously and up your chances of success, you kind of cater your resume to the particular company based on doing research. This is kind of the same thing. So the takeaways, I'd say, I'll share these slides, but focus in on this part. You know, these bullet points here, I think are really solid gold. And the next time you're giving a presentation that really matters, if you want to feel confident that you can ace it, start with that audience part and then think about your intent. Align your intent with the people, the project, and the organization, and then you can start crafting your actual message. So I'm going to hand it back over to Pradeep here to start talking about what the actual message can be.
Cool. Thank you so much, Alec. And now maybe it's time to be narcissistic again and put myself on spotlight. If there are questions to Alec, you can always put them on chat, and I'm sure Alec would reply to you as well on chat as possible. And of course, at the end of the session, I would want Alec to share his email ID or LinkedIn contact so people can connect with him. Thank you so much, Alec. That kind of sets the context for the next part of the session, which I call as the structure of a winning deck. What we're going to do in the next 20 odd minutes is try to understand what would be the ideal ingredients of any pitch that you make in front of investors as an investment fundraising pitch, or for this particular competition, as we say. This is more like a structure. It's not as if you need to have all these things, but ideally, if you have all these things, it would help. And where did I get this insights from? This is from my experiences having worked with over 550 plus startups across the world, building investment decks for them. I have done a series of interviews with 52 different investors, asking them what is it that they really look at when they look at a startup. And of course, my own personal experiences having worked for these large corporates. Now, my first question, again, I like to always start with the purpose. What is the only single purpose of any investment pitch? Okay, what is the only single purpose? What is the objective you achieve out of it from a pitch that you make to investors, or any pitch deck for that matter? What is the only purpose? Can you please put it on chat, or you can put it on, unmute yourself and speak to me as well. If you were to define, if it's an investment pitch to get money, okay. Okay, let's say Alec meets you on the street. He says, come and pitch your company to me. What is the objective of that pitch? Get investments, okay. That's the final goal. But what, yes, thank you, Jared. The only purpose of any investment or of any pitch is for you to get the next meeting. That's all. It's like a key that will open the door where Alex says, hey, I like what you're saying about, let's come and meet and discuss. So the reason I'm insisting on this so much is many times I see startups and young companies get carried away thinking that the moment they go and pitch, they will get the funds. They will get an investor signing the check. That doesn't happen. What you're trying to really do is use those 10 minutes to get the investor or the audience to tell, hey, I like what you're saying. Can we meet up for a cup of coffee, or why don't you come down to my office? That's all. The moment you bring this mind shift rather than this mindset where you're saying you will get an investment out of it, the way you will approach it will be different. What you will speak will be different. And that's the reason why I want you to understand that. If I were to summarize that, I would say the purpose is for the audience to either go, oh my God, or the audience to say, are you really serious? Or the audience saying, wow, or them saying, aha, or they're saying, really. If you can get any one of these reactions from your audience, you have done your job. They will want to get more, and they will want to meet you more, and they will want to speak to you more. So what makes the 13 slides of any investment pitch an ideal pitch deck? Number one is what I call as the standing slide or the intro or the value proposition. Just so before I get into that part, all this is there in the blue book. You can go to the page number 43 or 44. This whole deck is there, so you can click on it. These are just placeholders. You can go ahead and use the structure to make your investment pitches. The reason I am giving you a template is so that it's easier for the judges also to track your flow when you're making the pitch, at least for this competition. So the value proposition is nothing but a couple of lines that tells the audience in a very crisp way, what is it that your business or your company or your service doing for the end user or the audience? What is your overarching mission or vision? It's not those fancy jargon words that you see on large corporate boards, but just very simple tactical stuff saying that we are, I think one of the teams here talks about being the Amazon of parking lots, or I don't know, I don't remember the exact words, or there's the other startup that says that we are on a mission to ensure that no one stops playing golf because they did not get the right training, right? So that's kind of a crisp two-liner to start off as the first slide. The reason this is also the first slide is because when you're setting up your laptop, things are not still ready, like Murphy played with me. People are watching that slide and you're not talking to it. So it kind of sets the context for the audience to understand what is it that you're going to speak about. Slide number 2, not in the necessarily in the same order, is a slide that sets the context as to what is the problem you are solving. Some of you are not solving a problem. Some of you are taking something that's already existing and making it better. So this is the slide where you tell the audience in the form of a story or in the form of an anecdote or in the form of a case study, what is the problem that you are trying to solve. That, hey, I looked at this, like I am seeing one team right now in front of my screen, Backyards Creators. They saw a young boy in their street who was not able to hear well. And when they asked his parents why did they not take him to the hospital, they said that to get him treated needs a surgery, and the surgery is exorbitantly expensive. In Indian rupee terms, that's close to almost 40 lakh rupees or 4 million Indian rupees. So these two boys set out on a mission saying that no young child will henceforth stay dumb or not able to hear, or deaf and not able to hear because of want of money. They have invented a device that can help people hear at probably 1/5 or 1/4 the cost of what it costs to do a thing. So that's the problem statement, saying that there are a lot of people who want hearing aids, but they are not able to afford it. And there's a big problem that people are facing. And now, how do you set the context for this problem? By telling that, hey, this is not a problem that only one boy in my street has, but this is a problem that 400,000 other children in India also have. Now, what happens is the investor does a math in his mind or her mind, saying that so many people, so there's a big problem, and there are so many people who have this problem. So if I am a businessman, I start counting my dollars. What if I solve this problem multiplied by 400,000 into, let's say, $100 per person? What is the money I can make? So what you are trying to do is you are setting the context for them to do the math rather than you doing it. Most people use the terminology of the market size for the slide. Sometimes it is okay to have the slide at a later part of your deck, but somewhere you need to set this because this is kind of the context setting for the value or the money that you can leverage out of it. Now what you do, you have set the context saying there's a problem, there are so many people have a problem, and then now you introduce your solution that, hey, we have brought this new device or we have brought this new service that can solve this problem for all these people. This is like the Eureka moment where you kind of passionately talk about what you are solving. And then the next slide is a little bit more deeper into the product. Don't go too detailed. Don't go into the architecture. Don't go into the programming languages. Don't go into the real nuts and bolts, but just a broad insight so that the audience is able to understand how your product or service works. The next part is everyone wants to know now there's a problem. There are so many people who have the problem. There's a solution, and here's how the solution works. But hey, we are all here because we want to make money. So please tell me, how do I make money? So here you start articulating how will your business generate money? Where will the revenues come? Will it come from the users buying the product, or will it come from someone else who will pay for the users? Like in most of the apps, sometimes the money comes directly from the people who buy the apps. Sometimes the money comes from the advertising revenue. So you articulate to the audience what are the different ways in which your business will make money, or where will the revenue come from. Slide number 7. And please remember, when I say slide number 7, it's not necessarily in the same order. It's just a structure that I'm giving you. If you can mix and match the structure, overall you would achieve everything that probably would be needed for the 10-minute pitch for this competition, and for probably a 10-minute investor pitch as well. The traction slide primarily talks to people as to how your product or service is performing. It is nothing but the number of people who have purchased your product. If you don't have a product or service in the market yet and you're still in the idea stage, it's the number of people who have tested it, or the number of alpha testing and beta testing users that you had, so that the investor now gets the conviction that whatever these guys are saying is credible. Because if you tell that I have created a product, but no one has used it, then I think there was someone who had that on the chat as well as the question. Then the credibility is somehow missing. So you bring in credibility by talking about traction. The traction could be either the number of real users that you already have, or number of testing users that you already had. If your business doesn't have either of these, the other way to define traction is to bring a corollary business where there are similar large number of users, and saying that, hey, this particular business, although not directly related to us, could generate so much of users. I think we also can do. Slide number 8 is primarily the go-to-market slide, the howdy slide. Here, please understand, investors or the audience does not want to know what tactics you're going to use. They want to understand the strategy that you want to use, right? So I see a lot of you on your pitch decks have put digital marketing. We will do road shows and all that stuff. Those are tactical stuff, which is to execute your strategy. But what is the overall strategy? How will you make people know and be aware of what your business or product is doing? That is what investors want you to articulate in this particular slide. The next slide is probably the most important slide, is that all of us think that investors put their money in the product or the service or the idea. But from my conversations with a lot of investors, yes, Harry, I will go into the example of a strategy versus a tactic. Okay, right? So let's take my own business example. So the tactic would be that I go to Facebook and I put an ad saying that, hey, I am Presentim. I build presentation decks for people to make their presentation, right? The strategy would be, let's say, for example, even the workshop that I'm doing today, I am putting myself out there in the public. I am not selling my product, but subtly I am letting the world know that there's this company called Presentim whose business is building presentations. You get the point? There, it's a hard sell where it's a tactic. Where it's not a tactic and it's a strategy, it's more of an underplay. You are letting the world experience it and then them coming back. So that way, what happens for me as a businessman, I have more leverage and I have more ability to bargain with the customer rather than when I'm doing a hard sell. So Harry, if I can understand your product, I can probably give you an example relating to what you do, right? So Harry, you are into the app that makes people be attentive, right?
Yeah, we help students with autism and ADHD pay attention by determining important moments in lectures or meetings and then sending them alerts. So whenever your phone buzzes, you're training your mind to instantly focus on whatever your phone is saying. So we are taking that and using that in lectures. So whenever something important happens, your phone buzzes.
Wonderful. So for you, a tactic could be saying that you reach out to different companies who are working with children with ADHD, and you send out brochures, or you send out them an emailer, or you send them an advertisement, right? A strategy would be for you to work with the large government body that is responsible for children with disabilities, get it in the government policy that, hey, there needs to be more attention to these children because their attention span is lesser, and work that out so that it becomes like a policy of the government, and then there's a need created for your product. Like I'm giving you a very example on the spot loud, but maybe if we discuss this in more detail, we could come up with more such strategies, right? So, or you work with the association of physicians who work with ADHD children. You go and do workshops with them. You don't tell them that buy my product, but you tell them that, hey, this is there. So that's the overall go-to-market strategy that we're trying to do that. Absolutely, I would love to meet you as well, Harry, right? Cool. Then comes the slide where you talk about the numbers. So numbers are, if you are already a business in existence, you talk about your revenue so far, the sales so far. But if you're still yet to go to market, put in some of the prospective numbers for the next couple of years. But when I talk about numbers, please remember these are very broad numbers. Don't copy your entire spreadsheet and put it on your slide. All that I want to know is the direction that your company is going in. Last quarter, we sold so much. Our revenue was so much. We spent so much on generating that revenue. This is my EBITDA. That's all. Just 4 big, large numbers. No one wants to know how much salary you paid. No one wants to know how much you paid for your IP rights. That no one really wants to know in those 10 minutes. They may want to know it when they call you for the next meeting. That's why I told you, remember, this meeting is only for you to get the next appointment. So just tell them and show them a graph. It could be a J curve, it could be an arrow going up, it could be an arrow going down and then coming up, whatever kind of a thing. The next component is talking about entry barriers. What is it that stops Sarah and Pradeep and Jared from copying what Harry is doing? So you need to articulate to the investor saying that, hey, this is a great idea. I am the one who found this idea, or my company is the one who found this idea. And we have created hedges by doing this. A hedge could be your patent. But please also note, patents could have a lot of loopholes. So a patent is not a guarantee that no one else can replicate what you're trying to do. A hedge could also be the time that it takes to come to the idea or to develop the idea, especially in biotech. The first runner advantage is a big advantage. So you can say that it took me 5 years to come here. Anyone else who wants to copy will take 5 years. By then, I would be way, way far ahead. So try to find different ways in which you can articulate what are the entry barriers for anyone else to copy what you have. This is also the part where you talk about your competition. Day in and day out, we see a lot of startups who come with tables where there's a table showing the different features, and the column that talks about their company has all tick marks, but the column that has all the other companies has tick marks and cross marks saying that everyone else in my competition doesn't have it. Be genuine. If there are competitors who are doing better than you in a particular area, it's okay. People want to know that because that's the scope of work for you to do it. And never ever utter a word saying, I do not have competition. That's like the dangerous, biggest curse that you can tell yourself. Because there might be competition in an indirect way. A person going by the town bus is a competitor to a person selling an electric motorbike. An electric motorbike is not competing against a motorbike that runs on gasoline. An electric motorbike or an electric car is competing against the person who's going by walk or by public transport. So there are different ways in which competition is. It could be direct, it could be indirect. Try to articulate it. From my first failure, my second failure, I realized that the reason we failed is that we were not able to show competition to the investors, because the investors were a little scared when they saw that no one else was doing what we were trying to do. So if you talk more about competition, sometimes the conviction is higher that there are so many people working in this space, so it looks like a good space. I don't know anything about the space, but maybe I should tie up with Jared or Kirsten Dunning and enter the space. And the final slide is nothing but the ask, which is where you kind of put your hands out and say, hey, I need money. So for you in this competition, if you already have a startup and you need funding, go ahead and talk about funding. But if you don't need funding, go ahead and talk about all the other things in terms of resources or human power that might help you move from here to here in your career. But more importantly, rather than not only asking about money, you need to also tell them very clearly why you need that money. Don't sit in a restaurant and sit on a paper napkin and write down just some random number because you like the number. Come out with very strong reasons why you need money. And when you get that money, what will you do with it is something that every investor wants to understand and bring in. And of course, like Dr. Lopez always says, every investor at the end of the day wants to make money for himself. He's not here to do charity or not here to support entrepreneurship, but all that he wants to do is to make money. So this is where you kind of have an appendix which talks about the exit that you want to give the investor. After 5 years, we will do an M&A, we will have an IPO, we will have preferential shares, whatever could be the way that you want to give an exit to the investor. Please remember, this is an exit to the investor and not to you. I see a lot of youngsters come with the question saying that, sir, how do I exit my company? No, it's not about you exiting. Yes, you can exit, but primarily here they want to know how they can exit and make money out of your business. Also articulate some of the important partnerships that you need. If you have a running product, working product, show a demo, because there's nothing like the real deal. Show a demo, and especially, like for example, Harry is shaking his head, right? So Harry, you can actually start off your presentation by showing a demo of your product rather than talking about the problem statement solution. That's a way you break the pattern. Everyone is expecting Harry to talk about problem statements, and Harry says, hey, why don't you all switch your phones on and download this app right away, right? So that's a good way for you to try it out. Of course, there are always risks in that, like Alex said. Sometimes taking the unbeaten path also has its own inherent risks, but that's okay. Some things that you can carry along is an executive summary, financial models, projecting how your company or product will behave with different scenarios of the world, with different macroeconomic scenarios, and some documents that talk about market research. The primary lesson that I want all of you to remember is, don't fill your slides with data. All that you need to do is summarize that data into meaning so that the audience is able to look at it and go, these 5 exclamations. Oh my God, or are you serious? Wow, aha, or really. If you can do that in those 10 minutes, you have the audience and you have your next meeting and you can go ahead. So don't dump your slides with data just because you have numbers and data. But the underlying common denominator is either do it with passion or don't do it at all. Because investors, I think I missed one slide. Yeah, that's where, oops. Yeah, I was talking about as the most important slide, the team, right? I'm sorry, I missed this slide. Like I said, in my interviews, most of the investors have come back and said that they don't invest in the product or the service. They invest in the team. They invest in you. And when I say the team slide, you need to put not your photographs or your names, but what each one of you in the team can do for the company. That's what they want to do. Because they know that even if the product fails, if the team is good, the team can take it forward and their money is safer. But if the team is not great, even the greatest product will not survive. So that's why this slide is kind of the most important slide in my view. And of course, to summarize, do it with passion or don't do it at all. So these are the 13 slides. There are only 12 slides and there's a 13th non-slide, what we call as a baker's dozen, where baker's dozen doesn't mean 12, it means 13. In the olden days in Britain, it used to happen that if a baker gave less than 12 slices of bread to the customer, he was flogged in the middle of the street. So what bakers did is, to avoid that risk, they always threw in one extra slice into the bread so that it was always at least 12. And most customers ended up with 13. That's why it's called the baker's dozen. And so for me, it's these 12 slides which are important. And the 13th component is these 6 components that we spoke about. This template is there online. Like I said, it's just a rough template I want you to look at. Use it in a structure that suits you and your product. If you do not have traction, no problem. It's all right. You don't need to talk about it. But if you have all these components, you're kind of in a good position to go ahead and pitch to investors. Alec, can you take a couple of minutes to give in your views on this part before I move into the design part? Alec, you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, I think that, like, just to make sure that there's no conflict between the 2 messages that we're saying, like those 12 or 13 slides, I think those are the right slides for pretty much any pitch situation. But how you simplify your message and what points you make on each slide, you know, whether you show the check mark or the hockey stick curve, you know, kind of depends on who you're talking to and what they care about. And so I think, like, this is a single coherent message here. I like those 12 slides. I will say, like, sometimes when you're pitching, if you research the company you're pitching to, they'll give you like a recommended deck, or they'll tell you to check, you know, certain boxes or whatever. I can't think of anything that's left off, you know. So what Pradeep just shared is pretty comprehensive. Sometimes, like, let's say you have a time limit of 5 minutes or 7 minutes, or, sometimes even 2 minutes, or just 60 seconds or something crazy like that, then of course you can't cover all of these. And in which case you try to think about like, what can you put on as an appendix versus what you actually speak to when you're giving a presentation. And then finally, I think that it's important to draw a distinction between a presentation that you speak to, like, hey, this is my visual aid, essentially. Very minimal text, some pictures, a backdrop to help me tell my story, almost like note cards that remind me what I'm supposed to say so that people are paying attention to me, versus a pitch deck that you send and they're meant to sort of read or digest it on their own. In which case you might need more complete sentences and you might need to give a little bit more context in the form of text. Yeah, this is all fantastic.
Cool. In fact, we're glad that you brought that point, Alec, because that's what's there on the slide screen there. Sometimes you need to have a pitch deck, which is nothing but a large visual format with very minimal text, which makes no meaning without you being there. You as the hero or the presenter, if you're there, that pitch deck makes sense, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. But sometimes people want you to mail some stuff to them, and that is where you send a pitch book, which is nothing but a more wordy format of your pitch deck with more larger sentences and some small paragraphs. But maybe what you need to do is shy away from combining these two into one document, because then you go and pitch once more and they see the same slides again. They already come with an attitude saying, I know this, I've already seen this. Hurry up, next slide, right? So try to have two different formats for these kind of things where people ask you to mail it, and for people where they ask you. My rule of thumb is this: I am happy giving out my PowerPoints to people because I know without me, those PowerPoints mean nothing. That's the confidence that you have to get as a presenter. If your slides mean nothing without you presenting it, that's when you have achieved like the zenith of presenting. But when people ask you for a pitch to be mailed, send them a pitch book. Wonderful. So now we'll get into the design part. And Alec, thank you so much. I think you had some hurried aspect that you wanted to get in. So in case you're not here till the last of the call, thank you so much for joining us on behalf of everyone at TiE University. We really appreciate what you've done today. And we look forward to you mentoring some of these students on their journey as well.
Sounds fun. Yeah. Thanks, Pradeep. I'll make sure I share my slides out.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, Sarah, you have a question.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just saying thank you.
Okay. I understand these icons, right? These smileys. Okay, cool. It's saying smile streaming. Okay, cool. Now we get into the last part, which is like my job, my day job of designing presentations. I will teach you some very simple tricks that each of you can use to make your designs powerful. I call it the design thinking workshop for non-designers, right? I want to put this photograph up. The reason is, when you and I were young children, when we experienced something new and we wanted to share it with our friend, the first thing we did was take a sheet of paper and draw a crayon drawing or a pencil drawing to show it. Somehow, as we grew older, as we went to school and college, we forgot that art of paper and pencil thinking. If there is one trick of the trade that I want to teach you today from my design business, it is this. Whenever you are ideating, whenever you are brainstorming, do not sit on a computer. Do not sit on Microsoft PowerPoint. Do not sit on Keynote. Go take lots of sheets of paper and pencil and sketch out all your ideas using the analog medium. Because you and I are people who think analog. We are not digital human beings. So that's kind of the trick of the trade. Now we will get into these 7 design principles that non-designers need to have. Principle number 1 is what I call as the signal to noise ratio. Sophia, are you still there? Okay, I think Sophia is not there. Sarah, which was the last movie you saw?
Oh gosh, the last movie I saw, I think it was the new Spider-Man Marvel movie.
Okay, done. Backyard Creators, have you seen the movie, the new Spider-Man?
No, sir.
No, okay. So Sarah, why don't you tell the story of that movie to these 2 boys from 10,000 kilometers away, and all of us, we can unmute ourselves. When Sarah tells the story, our job is to create noise. You can do whatever noise you want to create. Go ahead, Sarah.
All right, so Spider-Man
Have you read
the Marvel Universe.
Hello.
Can
you hear me? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
This is
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
beautiful.
Come in and try this.
talented
One, two,
kids,
three.
Okay, stop.
That is
Stop.
wonderful.
Okay, everyone
That is
stop. Everyone
wonderful.
stop. Wonderful. Okay. Sarah, now we will not make noise and you can tell the story. Go ahead.
Okay, so Spider-Man is a character within the Marvel Universe, and the Marvel Universe is comprised of many different characters, many of whom have
Okay.
special.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Okay. Team Backyard Creators.
Yes.
Was Sarah giving you some kind of a signal? Is every communication a kind of a signal, right? She was giving a signal to you. In the first scenario, you did not get the signal. Why?
So there is so much of noise.
Noise, right? In the second instance, you got the signal. Why?
Yes, sir. Because there is no noise.
There is no noise. Wonderful. So when we talk about visual forms, visual slides, every single slide in your pitch deck is giving a signal to the audience. Do you agree? Right? It is wanting to communicate a message to the audience that they need to understand. And everything that stops that message from reaching the audience clearly is nothing but noise, what we call as visual noise. So what's visual noise? Let me explain with an example. So I have the slide here. On this slide, I really want to tell my audience only one thing, that in the country that's marked with green, the internet connections are more than the countries that are marked in the other colors and less than one country. Okay, I repeat, more than 4 countries, less than 1 country. Okay, now tell me whether the photograph of the earth on this background is needed to communicate this message. Not needed, right? Do I need the blue background that's there to communicate this message that it is lesser than, more than? Not needed. Do I need those vertical lines of the grid? Not needed. Do I need those numbers that denote the internet connectivity? No. Remember, all I want to say is less than, more than. So I don't want to tell how much less and how much more. So I don't need those numbers as well. Do I need the logo on the right-hand corner? Not needed, because it's not relevant to the message that I want to give. So all this that is stopping that core signal to going to reach my audience is nothing but visual noise. How do I remove noise? I remove noise this way. So now in one instant, in 1, 2, 3 seconds, Sarah is able to understand that Pradeep is talking about the red bar and he's comparing it with the 1 long bar above it and 3 smaller bars below it. So the audience gets the message loud and clear because I have removed all the visual noise. A lot of people ask me this question: should I put the logo of my company on every slide? In fact, large corporates insist on putting their logo on every slide. My question to them is, for the last 1 hour that I have been speaking, have I told you my name is Pradeep? I am from Presentim. Okay, now today we will talk about presentation design. We will talk about design principles. My name is Pradeep. I am from Presentim. Now we will talk about storytelling, and I will teach you 2 books that are important for storytelling. My name is Pradeep. I come from Presentim. Do we do that when we converse with people? We don't do that. Then why do we do that with our slides? So don't put your logo on all slides, because it is not adding any value. All that your slide should have is that one core message that you want the audience to look at. And then the audience has to focus on you, because you are the hero, you are the heroine, you are the superwoman, you are the superhuman being there. The attention of the audience has to be always on you, and it will not be on you if the slides have too much of content. The next part that I want you to understand is the importance of data. Okay, let's say this is the blood pressure measurements of all the employees who are working in Human's company. Okay, Human is here on the call. There are like 100 employees, and I generate all the blood pressure for all of them, and I show you this graph. Human, can you do anything with this graph?
With this,
What do you take away from this graph?
well, I see there are 2 people that have the highest blood pressure, and everybody else is there's a bit of an average.
Right. So the graph looks great. The graph looks complicated, but the meaning for Human is very limited, because the data is too overwhelming for Human. So now how do I bring in meaning to this data? I convert this data into something like this. Now what happens is Human has a reaction that says, oh my God, really? 70% of my employees have high blood pressure. So now how does it make meaning to Human? If 75% have high blood pressure, it means something is wrong in my workplace, or my employees are not having healthy habits. I may lose some of them to heart attack. I may have problems because of comorbidity if COVID hits. So I should do something. So this is where data brings in meaning, and your job when you make presentations is to bring the meaning for the audience and not the data. Don't dump your slides with data. Dump your slides only with the meaning of the data, because data slides are all about the meaning of the data and not the data by itself. The second concept is the concept of picture superiority. Try to use images that relate to what you're trying to talk. Sometimes people just randomly pick up one image because it's there on the computer. It has no relation to what they're talking about. The audience is trying to understand why is this image there in the first place. Try to use images that can give the audience a true story. What's the problem with this particular image? It's an image that looks very artificial, because you and I, if you go to a hospital where our friend is getting an operation and you have the doctor and the nurse standing like this, giving a smirk, you and I would not want your friend to go there and get his surgery done, because it's an artificial image. You know, it's a photograph from a stock image. Try to bring in real life images. Try to make the message really loud and clear. Give a subtle image that kind of helps reinforce the message. The second aspect in terms of using image is bringing in the human element. Don't show images that are very abstract, that are very artificial. Most common thing that I see people when they talk about partnership is those two hands shaking. Sometimes there's an earth behind it, a globe behind it, some building behind it, and two people are shaking their hands. It's very cliched, very boring. How will you get people's attention? Use something that relates to them in their real human life, like this image of a boat where there are 8 guys trying to row together. That's teamwork for you. That's partnership for you. And this image will stick to the audience's mind because it's something humane. It's something that they are able to see in their own real life. The third concept is the concept of empty space. What is empty space? Empty space is all that space that you can create in your slide without dumping content or images or visuals into it. In this particular slide, the customer wanted us to also put some space, some element on the lower right-hand corner because there's empty space. But what do you actually do? You kind of work on the core message, which is hara hachi bu, which is eat only until you are 80% full, and use one image that kind of reinforces that message. But the problem with this particular image, is that the empty space is divided into 2 parts. So what do? We make it a little better by changing it to this image. The power of this slide is not the image there, but the power of the slide is everything that is not there. The more the empty and white space that you create on your slides, the more powerfully your messages will come to the audience. The fourth concept is contrast. My friend Paul Rand says, without contrast, you are dead. If there's one very key element in design you need to understand that you have to use color to give the maximum contrast because people are trying to read. When you put a slide like that, what happens is the audience is trying to peer their eyes into the deck and understand what's there. So give contrast with powerful colors, with a lighter background, darker color, darker background, lighter color. As much as possible, work on contrast as the key element of why you use color. The concept of repetition. All my slides, I know all of you have now been trained. There's one color that I have used repeatedly for you to get your attention. What is that color?
Red.
Red.
The color red. Did I tell you that I have used the color red for you to understand that it's important? No. I trained your mind over my slides by repeating the same element. So now wherever you see red, your mind is already trained to look at red. And finally, the principles of alignment and proximity, which is nothing but bring in things that are similar together, separate things that are dissimilar. So here there are 4 lines, but you don't know which is the topic, which is the subtopic, which is the speaker, which is the company of the speaker. How do I bring in alignment and proximity principles? By combining things that are same together and then separating them by a lot of space with the things that are not similar to that. Now your audience has a clear understanding of what they need to focus on and what they cannot focus on if there's a need. When you choose colors, when it's a large audience, use dark colors as your background and lighter text for the foreground. If it's a smaller audience like a Zoom audience, use lighter backgrounds and darker text as your foreground. Remember the 3-second rule. Your audience should look at your slide only for 3 seconds and understand what's there. And then they have to switch their focus back onto you. If you've looked at the 130 slides that I have put across today, there is not one slide where you need to spend more than 3 seconds. Because I am the hero. I want you to look at me and listen to what I am talking, because I am the messenger and not the PowerPoint. In terms of fonts, try to have a bare minimum font size of 40. You can go up to as a large a font size as possible, no problems. But don't put font sizes of 18 and 12 where people are trying to peer through their eyeglasses and a lens to know what you have put on the slide. To summarize all these things, remember, make your slides as visual as possible. I'm talking in the context of presenting. When you're presenting these slides, remember only one idea per slide. Today, I have done 136 slides in the last 1.5 hours. So number of slides don't matter if you layer them into one idea per slide. And also remember, we are entering the conceptual age where people want to listen to stories. They don't want to listen to numbers and data. They want to understand and get meaning out of that data. They want you to make a difference to their lives. They don't want to just listen to you talk about yourself, but they want to listen to you talk about what you can do for them. So the second part, which is the delivery part, try to be as passionate as possible, try to be as energetic as possible, try to have as much of action as possible. It's very difficult on a Zoom kind of an environment to bring in action and energy, but I probably experimented today by standing and delivering this lecture. And these are some things that you could also experiment. To summarize the entire session today, you as an entrepreneur, your singular goal has to be to make it human for your audience. The moment you make anything human, put a story around it, they are with you on the journey. And then what you you find mistakes, the audience tells you mistakes, you repeat it, which is nothing but practicing it. You come back to the drawing board, change it, and you repeat, and the whole cycle goes again. Make it human, do, repeat, change, repeat, do, repeat, change, repeat. So we come to the end of my session. Good that we are on time. We had planned for 2.5 hours with questions interspersed. We have 6 more minutes for the 2.5 mark. My LinkedIn and Instagram and my email ID are there. If there's anything that I can help you with your entrepreneurial journey or your career in your college, please do reach out. I'm usually good at replying to emails in a couple of days. I would love to help you as your mentor, or as I said, as your big brother. We will stop the presentation, and Dr. Lopez and I am here. If there are any questions relating to today's session or any questions relating to the competition, please go ahead. And spotlight in the tutor. Cool. Any questions that you have? And in the meanwhile, may I request Aryan also to put the link to the feedback form. If you could take a couple of minutes and put your feedback onto the form, it would help us fine-tune the program, fine-tune the workshops. It'll help me as an individual also to understand what I could do better when I do an audience next time. So the forms are there. If there are any questions that you want to ask me relating to whatever I spoke in the last 1.5 hours and what Alex spoke, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask those questions. So either I have been very extraordinarily brilliant that I don't have any questions, or I have been extraordinarily stupid that people are just switched off. I don't know which one of them I should choose. So, thank you, Sophia.
With the team, how would you design the team slide? Because I'm
sorry, I'm not able to see. Oh, okay, that's Harry. Yeah, I was not able to see. Yeah, go ahead.
What a lot of people suggested, what we do for the team slide is like populate it with logos of places they worked with, populate it with bios and stuff like that. But from my understanding, simplify. So how would you do? How would you like try and show and brag the team while also simplifying?
Right. So very valid point, Harry, that it's always a difficult task to balance the need to be simple and clutter-free and yet kind of, showcase what it is there. So one of the things that we could do is, let's say you have a team of 4 people and each of you has 8 years of experience. So I would put a large number saying a team that has 24 years of experience working on digital apps. Now what I have done, I have summarized that data and I have also built in credibility for the audience saying that, hey, these guys are not just talking from thin air. They have 24 years of credible experience. This is one way of tackling it. The other way, like people have sold, if you have some solid companies, like for example, I work with Shell and ExxonMobil, which are really huge companies, which adds a lot of credibility to me as a salesman. So go ahead and use them. But if there are companies that probably no one knows, don't bother about putting them there. Rather, talk about what you got out of those companies. Saying that I work for this company, ABC, where I met 100 customers every week and I learned everything about sales there. So people want to understand what is it that you got out of it rather than what you did, kind of thing. Yeah.
So like for me, I would say everyone on the team has ADHD or autism. This is for us. and that would be the big thing. That would be the big sell.
Yes. So I would use that in your first slide, saying that all of us face this in our personal lives, and that's where we started to build this company. So now what happens is you have built credibility, saying that you're not talking about ADHD as a theoretical concept, but you are experiencing it every day yourself. And that's why you are building this product, right? In the team slide, you don't talk about ADHD, but you talk about your experience of how you were able to connect the problems you faced as a person with ADHD to the solutions that you have created. So that's the way I would tackle your understanding, right? Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, please do take a couple of minutes before you sign off to give us feedback so we understand where we can help. If there's any other question, I would love to take them. Of course, the email ID is always there. I'll ask Aryan to put my email ID on the chat as well. Also, you can reach out to us via university@TIE.org if you have any questions related to the competition. Cool. We are at 10:28 p.m. India time, 2 minutes for the official closing of the call. Aryan, you can stop the streaming on